Aloha no, and mahalo for joining me for another edition of Long Story Short, this time from the Pacific Northwest. I'm Leslie Wilcox. Bob Sevey, fondly remembered as the Walter Cronkite of Hawaiʻi, gave me my first television job in the old KGMB newsroom. It'll be a pleasure to talk with him about Hawaiʻi television then and Hawaiʻi television now.
In part one of this special two-part Long Story Short, the former KGMB news director and anchor begins by sharing what only a close circle of family and friends has known. He has inoperable cancer.
Last time people saw you on television, you had gold hair, this very distinctive and very lovely
It was
blonde.
gorgeous, actually, yeah. I don't have much of it left, Leslie, and it's not exactly by choice. This is a byproduct of chemotherapy. I do have cancer, and so I'm in chemo. The only side effect that I've suffered at all is a lot of the hair wound up every morning on the pillow. I'd have to sort of, like you had a long-haired cat. And so I decided, well, what the heck? I'll look like I'm going to join the Marine Corps and buzz cut it.
It's a good look for you, and bald is in, right?
Bald is in, yep. But otherwise, by the way, I'm doing fine, and we're under control.
And you're taking proactive means of taking care of yourself, or is it? I mean, how do you handle that?
Well, the thing I found out about cancer is you do take care of yourself. You make the decisions. You listen to the doctors. They give their advice, their opinion, but you've got to decide yourself. You want to do this, you want to do this, you want to do nothing, you decide. And right now, for me, the chemotherapy I'm on is I think, the best way to go. If it works, fine. If it doesn't, we'll try radiation. Or a baseball bat upside of the head, whatever.
You sound so matter-of-fact about it.
Well, there's no sense getting all clutched up. I was first diagnosed 13 months ago, at which time the doctor said I probably had a year to live. Well, I figure I'm running on somebody else's time now for a whole month, and I feel fine. So I've just renewed my subscription to Golf World magazine, and I still buy green bananas.
And he still has that commanding, comfortable camera presence.
We will recall where we were and what we were doing when we heard the news the Challenger had exploded.
You know, I think a lot of people never find what it is that they're meant to do. You seem to have found at an early age you wanted to do news, and blessedly you were good at it.
I wanted to do broadcasting. And I wanted to do that ever since I was a little kid living in Minneapolis. My dad had a good friend who had a 15-minute radio show every morning on WCCO radio in Minneapolis. And one day I sat in the audience, and another day I sat in the control room. And I was just fascinated by the fact that here's this guy talking into this thing, and people all over the Midwest can hear him. And I thought, that's pretty magical. And I think from that day on, being a broadcaster, and I was thinking radio because if television had been invented, they weren't talking about it very much. That's really all I wanted to do.
And that's exactly what he did. In 1966, KGMB owner Cease Heftel recruited Sevey to run a top-quality news department and authorized him to spend what he needed to do it.
When I had signed, I said, I suppose we ought to talk about budgets. And he said, it's been my experience with budgets that news directors never think they're enough, and owners and general managers always think they're too much. So your budget is whatever it takes to make this the best news department, not in Hawaii, but west of the Rocky Mountains. And that was the only budget meeting we ever had, period. There were department head meetings weekly, and I never had to go to one. Some of the other department heads, I understand, were a little miffed about that and said, how come Sevey doesn't have to come and get yelled at? And he said, because Sevey's the only one who has to go on the air every night at 6 o'clock and represent this station to the public.
And when you say he gave you a blank check, you must have had some constraints in your head. I mean,
well, because
how
he did
you
it
figure
that
out?
way, he put the constraints in my head, because suddenly I was responsible. And the last thing in the world I was going to do was go hog wild. And I would have felt that was somehow a betrayal of the trust that he had invested in me. And so obviously I didn't offer everybody $1 million a year to come and play television news with me. Tried to keep everything within reason. But he didn't question it. And I really want to emphasize this. He left us alone. Cease never once tried to influence the way we covered news. The only thing he ever said, I don't remember, he ran in, I think, 1960, he ran against Hiram Fong for the U.S. Senate and did a pretty good job. He had moved out of the station all during the campaign, and afterwards he grumbled that he wished he could have gotten as good coverage from his station as he did from the others. And I suppose we were probably very sensitive to it too.
And he grew that station and his media empire.
Oh, Checkers and Pogo and the Sky Slide and the whole thing.
And you think the success was due to his entrepreneurial bent as opposed to let's bring some consultants in and let's figure this all out?
Oh yeah, Cease's best consultant was Cease Heftel. Is Cease Heftel. I mean, other people may have contributed some ideas, but obviously I'm very indebted to Cease. The 11 years I worked for him were far and away the best broadcast years of my life.
You know, that is just so different from what happens in television news today. Was it different from what happened at that time as well?
I'm sure it was different. And I found out how different 11 years later when Cease sold the station to a corporation. And now I'm working in corporate environment. And boy, you talk about different ballgame, different rules.
You continued with KGMB for many years after that. How did life change for you? I mean, television news changes
180
anyway.
degrees, and I think that was the beginning of the end for me. Consultants are people who devise news formats and things for television stations to do. And they tend to do it on a formulaic basis. The first thing they said was, we've got to put in a 2.5-minute weather segment. And if you'll recall, our weather was either the lead story or it was the last 15 seconds of the broadcast. Weather tomorrow will be mostly sunny, a few Mauka showers, blowing occasionally Mackay, temperatures from the mid to upper 80s, trades blowing 15 to 25 miles an hour. That's the news, good night. And that pretty well did it. And they said, you got to have a weather person. And that's where I bowed my neck. And I think that's where I first got in trouble with corporate ownership. I simply wouldn't do it. Because we only had 22 minutes anyway out of the half hour.
When you consider commercials and sports.
Formats and everything. And to throw another couple of minutes away on what I consider to be an unnecessary commodity. I mean, I understand they do weather there now with all the bells and whistles, and I suppose it's great. I don't understand it, but I suppose it's great.
But that had worked in mainland markets, so that's why it came here.
It works in Peoria, so it's got to work in Honolulu. And that's sort of the consultant's view of things. And I hope my former colleagues and friends in the television business in Hawaii will forgive me for saying all this, but it's really the way I feel. And I feel the same thing when I sit and watch, as I do, the Seattle broadcasts each night. They've got some really good people there. But just watching, I can almost tell you which consultant they're using.
But why a consultant? Did there need to be a change?
No, nothing was broke. We were still, we were just incredibly number one in news.
And how number one were you? Because this was in the age before cable stations and internet, and there was a fourth broadcast station. How much of an audience did you have at that time?
Well, I mean, going by shares, we were pulling 50 and 60 shares.
Which is unheard of today.
Yeah.
The market is so fragmented.
Yeah.
Sevey's best TV memories are from the days when KGMB, still owned by CSFTEL, beat local news competitors by being fast, nimble, and original.
I think our finest hour was the night the Apollo 11 launched for the moon, and then the night it landed on the moon. I had decided that it would be a good thing if somebody in our news department knew a little about the space program, and I decided that maybe it should be me, since all the other reporters had things of importance to cover and I didn't. So CESE allowed me to go back for Apollo 9 and Apollo 10, and then for Apollo 11. Well, if you'll recall, in those days there was one satellite, which meant that we couldn't take the CBS coverage, Channel 2 couldn't take the NBC, Channel 4 couldn't take the ABC. We had to take the NASA World Pool, so we all had the same video. And we decided that having our own audio was important. So not only did I go to Kennedy Space Center for the launch, but we bought a position at Mission Control for the landing. The night of the moon landing, the other stations were covering it, doing audio from their studios. And I was doing it from Mission Control. And I didn't know they were going to do this, but the sales department decided to take an overnight Nielsen. We had a 91 share, which was
blew them away on the other channels.
Absolutely beyond belief, which I'm glad, because it cost CESE a heck of a lot of money to do all that. And
91%. Have you ever heard of a number as big for another program?
I never have. It was totally unique, but it was just kind of the way we did things. And I also remember when Channel 4 decided, when satellites became more readily available, they were still brutally expensive. Channel 4 decided to bring in the first 10 minutes of the ABC evening news. And they ran large ads in the newspapers and promoted it very heavily.
Oh, competition.
Yep. And we didn't say a thing. But the night they brought in the first 10 minutes of the ABC evening news, we brought in the entire Cronkite show and did it every night from then on. And that was CESE's idea, by the way. That he just wasn't about to be number two.
And was he is and was a businessman. Was his goal making money or making quality or both? And in what proportion?
I don't know the proportion. I never saw the books. All I know is that CESE seemed to do well. He paid Aku a tremendous amount of money, but I think Aku made him more money than he was paid.
Aku was reputed to make more money than any DJ in the country. He was at one time
reputed to be the highest paid DJ in the country, yeah. He paid me a very handsome amount of money. And I assume that we made money for him. See, I never did know how much a spot or a sponsorship or anything cost in our news broadcasts. That wasn't my end of the business. And
did you even know when they were taking the ratings?
Oh yeah, you always
months
know.
Of the year?
You always know when the ratings are on.
And did you do special shows? For example, nowadays TV stations get accused of doing blood and guts and sensational stories to grab people during ratings.
Well, they're not only accused of, but rightly so. They do.
When you started with CSFTEL running the newsroom and anchoring the news, were newsrooms known to be a money-making operation, or were they a public service?
No, in those days, the news was not a moneymaker. The news was how you made your reputation. The news was how you served the public. Remember, broadcast stations used to be licensed in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. I don't know if that applies anymore, given the state of the current industry and the FCC. But no, news was not a profit center.
So CSFTEL was expecting you to make money indirectly by enhancing the product of the television station.
If we came in with a 50 share at 6 o'clock, that's going to do real good things for the shows at 6:30 and 7 o'clock and for the rest of the evening. And then if we can come back with another good solid share at 10 o'clock.
And you know nobody does a 50 share anymore
Well,
anywhere.
I know.
But you did at the time.
We did at the time, yeah. Wow. And it was neat, actually.
Bob Sevey, Linda Coble, Gary Sprinkle, with Newsroom 9 at 6.
Good evening. This 4th of July is extra special because it
You
also
had a
marks...
very talented anchor staff. Any one of your anchors could have been a main anchor somewhere else. At one point you had, it was you at 6, it was Bob Jones and Tim Tyndall at 10. Later there was Linda Coble, there was Kirk Matthews.
No, we had really, really talented people. And not only were they talented then, they still are. And I was very fortunate that in a market the size of Honolulu, and it's not the biggest place in the world, or Hawaii's not the biggest state in the world, we were able to get both from the local community and from the mainland really good people who were willing to commit to Hawaii. I mean, you know, Linda came from Portland, and you won't find a more kama-aina than Linda Coble anywhere right now. So, yeah, as I say, I'd love to go through all the names, but I'm just scared to death of the ones I'm going to forget, and I don't want to do that. The people that I tried to hire and the people I did, well, you're a good example. You were a very good newspaper reporter.
And knew nothing about television, by the way, when you hired me.
It didn't take you long to learn. And you were still a very good reporter, and that was the main thing. Same with the late Doug Wu, marvelous reporter. Bambi Weil,
the judge.
now Judge Eden Hefo. Oh gosh, you know, if I start naming everybody and then don't name everybody, I mean, Carolyn Tanaka and Elisa Yadao, Bart Frito and Don Baker.
Matt Levi?
Matt Levi, oh yeah, what an investigative reporter he was.
Linda Coble doing your features.
Linda Coble doing features, and at some point co-anchoring. Kirk Matthews came along thanks to Linda. And we had some pretty good sports guys too. Like we had a fellow early on named Al Michaels. Wonder whatever happened to him as our sports anchor. The irrepressible and marvelous Jim Leahy.
Gary Sprinkle came out of your
Gary
newsroom
Sprinkle
as well.
came out of our shop, yeah. And I'm delighted that, you know, Gary is still going strong, as is Kirk. Linda sticks her toe back into the TV lake every once in a while. I'm just very proud of those people.
Incredible
we had
talent.
Bob Jones, another newspaper man that we converted to TV.
You know, I always wondered why you hired people like me, because I didn't have TV skills. I didn't have performance skills. I had news gathering experience as a print reporter. Why would you take a chance on somebody like me when you're the #1 station?
Well, you know, we did talk a couple of times before I hired you, and it's pretty easy to see that you are an outgoing person, that you express yourself well, that you're not afraid to talk. The only thing you have to get over is the fear of talking when there's a camera aimed right in your face, and you can get over that real quick. And you suddenly start learning to verbalize your report instead of just putting it on a piece of paper. You put it on the paper, it goes into your mind, you tell the camera what it is. You learn to edit, in those days, film and then tape to visualize your story. And it's not that hard.
But to you, the news experience was the important part.
That was the essential, was she's a good reporter, he's a good reporter. And that was the criterion, number one.
What about Joe Moore, the sportscaster hired by Sevey, who switched to news on KHON and overtook Sevey in the ratings race? Bob has a lot to say about him, fondly, next week in part 2 of this interview.
Let's go back a little bit to when you retired. You were doing, your station did not want you to leave, but you chose to retire.
I did.
And you weren't of retirement age yet. Why did you leave?
Shall I tell you the story about Goo's Golden Tire Shop?
I think I was sitting behind you at the time this all happened, but please do.
It was about 20 minutes to 6, and the great huge column of black smoke appeared adjacent to Nimitz Highway, and we heard the fire radio say that there was a fire at Goo's Golden Tire Shop. And we had the crash unit, the thing with the dish on it and everything. So we rolled that, and they got there pretty quick. And within the first 5 minutes of the news broadcast, whoever the reporter was did a very credible job of telling us this is a whole bunch of tires that are on fire. There are no people involved. There are no injuries. There's one little old lean-to in the middle that's going to burn up, but other than that, nothing else is in danger.
No
It's
concerns
under
about air
control.
quality. Yeah.
The wind is blowing the smoke out to sea. Okay, I think we just did that story. About, 10, 12 minutes later, I'm told we're going back to Goo's Golden Tire Shop. Well, okay, all right, because there's still a lot of black smoke and maybe some people didn't get the word. So we go back, and the reporter essentially does the same story because there isn't any other story. At this point, obviously they haven't figured out what started it. That'll take time. And okay, we've wrapped that up. Now we're in sports. Gary's doing the sports. Linda and I were co-anchoring at the time. And the floor director relayed the message that we're going back to Goo's Golden Tire Shop again at the end of the broadcast. And I said, no, we're not. Linda got down and crawled under the anchor desk and ran into the control room to tell them, no, we're not. Well, the word was, yes, we are. The news director and the producer were both in accord. They were in the control room. We came back, and we had a monitor on a hydraulic lift. And all of a sudden, I heard the whir, and the monitor came up, and there's a picture of Goo's Golden Tire Shop.
Meaning, you as an anchor, you better talk about it because it's right there next to your head.
And I did my 15 seconds of weather and said goodnight.
And you were steaming.
I was quite unhappy, but not as unhappy as were the news director and the producer, who were all over me like a bad rash. And the next day I was summoned to the general manager's office and told that the producer was the final authority on the 6 o'clock broadcast, and I better understand that or else. And I explained that I had been the final authority on that broadcast for the last 20 years. We'd done fairly well, and no, I was not going to accept that. And he made what I considered to be a threat that I better or else. So I went back and sat down and wrote out my resignation and posted it on the board with 2 weeks' notice. I had just signed a new 5-year contract, and attorneys came flying out from Iowa to tell me that I couldn't resign because of my contract. And I reminded them that my attorney had written the contract. And yeah, I could resign. Yeah, it obviously cost me a lot of money because I'm just quitting 2 weeks. And my last day was July 4th, 1986, 20 years to the day.
Independence Day.
Independence Day, yeah. And I'm kind of sorry that it ended that way. We played it for the public as retirement, And it was, so that wasn't totally dishonest, but that's what happened.
It occurs to me that you left Hawaii after you tried to help Cease Heftel, your former boss at KGMB, get elected governor.
I did that in '86 when he ran for governor, and I was at loose ends, and he needed a volunteer, so I volunteered for the campaign.
And he was the target of a smear campaign, and it was a very bitter defeat.
It was brutal. There may have been dirtier election campaigns sometime somewhere, but I can't imagine.
Did that make you lose a little faith, a little heart for Hawaii?
It did. It was a scurrilous campaign of rumors spread mostly on the neighbor islands, among the agricultural community. Much of what was being said out there was never heard in Honolulu, so we couldn't counter it. We couldn't go on the media and say this rumor isn't true, because most of the people had never heard it. But it's also a truism that if you don't win the neighbor islands, you're not going to win governor of Hawaii. And we didn't, and we didn't. And I took it, I think, a lot harder than Cease did. It was a primary on Saturday, and Monday he flew to Los Angeles and founded a Hispanic radio empire.
Made a fortune, again.
Yeah, again.
Yet again.
Yeah. Very resilient guy, Mr. Heftel. But yeah, that did take some of the bloom off the rose of Hawaii for me. I knew politics was a dirty business. I just didn't ever believe that it could be like that.
More than 2 decades later, retirement outside Seattle involves serious health issues. Sevey's wife Rosalie has Alzheimer's, and he has cancer, lymphoma. The man known to his former colleagues as Cap, for Captain of the Newsroom, is steering a course in changing conditions.
You can see that Bob Sevey is still a consummate communicator, and he has more to say. So we'll let our conversation spill over into another edition of Long Story Short next week. Mahalo for joining us. I'm Leslie Wilcox. Ahui ho.
When I started on July 4th, 1966, the news staff consisted of Tim Tyndall, photographer Ted Shibuya, photographer Tom Hisamura, and me.
How did you cover the news of Hawaii with those few people?
Poorly. But Cease gave me in effect, the blank check to do stuff. And so I started hiring people as fast as I could. Guys like Jack Kellner, Jim Mankey.
They were radio guys, right?
Yeah, but you were a newspaper girl, right?
Right.
I mean, it's news is news. It's just a different format that you're putting it in.